Leading the group of humans through the cargo area, the captain explained all the repairs that were going on, starting with the fact that the doors actually work now. She even showed on one of her data pads how the cargo bay doors, only half of them worked. Now all of them worked just fine. Along with that, one of the simplest things that always goes awry is the lighting. As the inspector looked up, he could see that all the lights were in fact working, so well that he had to turn his face, in fact. Along with that, they looked in every single gravimetric motor, not only those that are mobile, but those inside the floor, were working, and working exceptionally well. No one was having any problems at all getting them to operate. As they moved on to the engine compartment, she mentioned how the engine efficiency, though complete garbage at barely 70% if they were lucky, was now operating between 97 and 100%, with absolutely no cooling issues. This was something that made the assessor immediately perk up. The maneuvering was even shown to be easier and almost slick in the way it was operating. With a patchwork ship, this was definitely something of note, as everyone expected a giant clang as the patchwork ship landed. Even with all the safety precautions in place, this is common. But this ship landed without any issues at all. As they went through the hull, they even asked one of the helmsmen about how it operated. The helmswoman stated how she never expected an engine to work so well. Joey's engine has so much power, it's beyond enjoyable. The captain explains how Joey spent hundreds of hours fixing the engine without any kind of breaks, as it seemed as he was a machine, constantly working more and more and more. The assessor, Mr. Tyrone, continued to note this on his pad, and just seemed to have a blank expression as he put it down. The next was the galley, and then the infirmary. As they entered the galley, Mr. Tyrone asked the chefs how life was on the ship now that they have a human on board. The chef, along with their staff, who was just finishing up, began to go on a rant about how well all their equipment worked. He took an extra special care of our needs. Thanks to him, the conversations are much more pleasant than just the normal gossip. How so? Mr. T asked. Now that the gravity controls and crew compartments are fixed, the amount of monohydrin bioxygen has been increased and temperature controls are fixed and everyone is in a much better mood. So, no additional issues with the only male on this ship? The co-worker seemed to be looking up with a extreme delight as she crossed her arms around this question. The chef butted in and said, I don't know about your females, but males are always a topic of conversation. Besides, once he upgraded the recreation center, things got quite interesting and downright pleasant. Hearing this, Mr. T wanted to see the recreation center. He was actually surprised to see a full-on Asian-style bathhouse set up, though not nearly full-size. It even had a 4-person sauna next to it, which was actually working. The additional areas, too, were for species that don't like hot water. How did you accomplish this? Joey, still inside his suit, said, Do you remember the excess heat from the engines? The assessor was suddenly paying full attention at this. The only issue is making sure that the dehumidifier is cycling water back into the tub. If it doesn't, we got more problems to deal with. But as long as they're functioning, everything here works perfectly. Mr. T continued to assess everything, looking around, and he seemed even more and more impressed at what he saw. This seemed to irritate the former co-worker a little bit more each time. They then headed to the bridge, and on the way, they passed a group of maintenance fixing the captain's room. What happened here? Mr. T asked. The co-worker jumped in. Yes, we would all like to know. She said this as smug as possible. Captain repeated, It's personal. Mr. T said, "I assure you, we will have the utmost discretion. However, my orders are to be as thorough as possible." The captain was kind of looking around to make sure nobody was listening too close, and unconsciously, she began to wrap her tail around her leg. She got closer to the assessor and said, "Do you have any idea, the slightest idea, of what my species goes through during a mating cycle?" She doesn't even wait for him to say anything before continuing. "Without a mate, we either have to medicate ourselves into a coma, or we have to deal with it through sheer will." She then points to what's left of her bed that's being cleaned up. "This is the results, as I do not trust the medication to allow me to remain fertile in the future. It is a choice we have to make, and something we have to deal with. Does that answer your question, Mr. Tyrone?" Mr. Tyrone bows his head a little bit and steps back as he writes a very small note on his datapad. The coworker: "You didn't use the only male on the ship to aid you with that issue?" The captain was glaring at the coworker. "I am required to answer the assessor's questions, not yours." The coworker was put back with this response as she saw that the captain had her tail now upstretched and straight, a sign of being ready to pounce and attack. Joey was smiling behind his mask at this. Leaving the quarters behind, they continued to the bridge. The only one still there was the comms officer, as they had a couple additional duties. They began to talk about how well the stations inside the bridge actually work. The efficiency so good that the assessor actually wanted to see the repairs. He knew as he looked on one of the data pads how much trouble they were having actually controlling the ship, even calling additional ships. But this was strange. He motioned, and Joey, without even saying anything, pulled out his tools and began to open the panels. The assessor was actually dumbstruck, and for the first time not stoic, as he couldn't believe how new it looked. He started complimenting Joey on the adjustments and began to get closer and closer, as the crew noted how much time Joey had spent upside down fixing things, if that's what was required. The comms officer even put in, "He would hold on as tightly as he could and move himself constantly until he found just the right angle to get the job done." The co-worker chimed in, "How was his work in your opinion?" The comms officer replied, "I've never had better," flipping her wings just a bit to emphasize this. After leaving the bridge, the last place to check is the infirmary. Doc is busy emptying areas of old items, her tentacles moving around the room as she seemed to move very little herself. The assessor, Mr. T, asked her if there was any major issues that came about due to Joey's presence. The doc: "Things have gone wonderfully." Mr. T: "Any issues with this crewmate?" Motioning at Joey, who was still standing there. Thankful again that he was in the suit, as he was again starting to sweat out every single gland. "Only one issue." The coworker began to grin at this. "He would come in completely exhausted." The coworker's smiles widened. "No matter how many times I told him to slow down, he just kept going, like a human-shaped machine." Now the coworker was smiling to the point where her teeth were showing. "I swear to the Great Maker, if he spent any more time in that compartment, he was going to die." Mr. T.S.: "What compartment?" The coworker was about to jump out of her skin at this point. The doc responded, "Which one? There wasn't a single crevice on this ship that didn't get entered and fixed up just right." As she said this, her tentacles waved to all different portions of the room in all different directions. Even her actual arms were motioning around, as one sprayed off to her right and the other one almost seemed to be pointing towards her chest. He had thermal and electrical burns all over his body, several bruised bones, overstretched ligaments, a massive case of malnutrition and dehydration, all of which I put in my reports. She hands over the data file. I just wish he had come to me sooner or more often. But the time he started receiving treatment, I didn't believe human biology could withstand much more. She showed the file, and it was clear to see that he barely saw the doc until the last month of his contract. The doc continued, As to see, just to get him back in functioning condition to perform his duties on this ship, I had to give him multiple nutrient drips and require 1 day off every 7 days for recuperation. This was my order as doctor of this ship. Mr. T examined the file and simply handed it back, thanked the doctor for her time, and excused himself, and they all headed back towards the loading bay. Though silent the entire walk back, Mr. T turned and thanked the captain for her cooperation in this manner, and the captain asked if the assessment has anything to do with the fact that she is not getting the new ship she was promised. The assessor was immediately silent for a while. The captain then asked why he was so interested in her crewman. Mr. T then reached into a pocket and pulled out an additional data pad. He then says how they were wondering if Joey was good enough to fix patchwork ships. He then turns to Joey and asked him, You think you can fix this design? Joey hesitantly looked over and then pulled up the data pad. What it showed was incomplete plans for a new ship. Under his mask, his anger grew to new heights. For the first time, Joey actually raised his visor, exposing his face. He then said, Course I can fix it. I designed it, after all. What? The assessor said. Yeah, this was stolen out of my quarters during my last contract. It was a supposed investigation, but they never gave me any paperwork stating that they were allowed to search anything. By the way, where'd you find it? Don't lie, just fix it. The coworker was starting to scream. Joey didn't raise his voice or even note that she was there, but simply turned it back to the assessor and said, I refuse to do anything until you answer my question. Now, the coworker was still screaming, but the assessor said it was put up for review by, It doesn't matter. If you want to work for our company again, just do what you're told. With this, even the assessor was a little put back. Joey, for the first time, turned and looked at her. Work for your mother again? No thanks. Just because she was captain of every single ship you have ever served on doesn't give you authority here. Then I will make sure you will spend eternity away from humanity. I will make sure of that. At that point, the assessor held up his hand, tells the coworker to calm down. You're only here as professional courtesy, and you need to remember why you are here. Why is he here? Was asked by the captain. The co-worker was suddenly silenced. All I see is a hunt for anything you could put down on that pad to damage his reputation further. This is a human matter. Besides, this human has a reputation. The captain straightened up before saying, Yes, and he lives up to his reputation. Everyone was paying attention as she said this quite loud. He has taken a ship that was held together by little bits of wire and good intention, and turned it into a ship that anyone would be proud to serve on. She paused for effect as more people came in. We expected this, as humans have a reputation. With this, the crew that was still around began to cheer. The captain added, Put that in your report. The assessor looked at her, looked at his pad, and simply excused himself at that point. Before storming off in a huff, the co-worker says, This isn't over. and then simply stomped her way out as though it was a child. Later, at one of the many bars in the space dock, the co-worker is sitting there doing shots, clearly been at it for a while as she is hunched over the bar, barely able to reach the shot that's being filled up with a strange, deep yellowish liquor. The captain came and sat next to her, orders a shot for herself, and buys the co-worker one so they could sit and talk. She ends up asking the former co-worker if she is the reason why the captain is not getting the new ship she was promised. The co-worker admits it, but doesn't seem to care, as she's slurring her speech so much that even the translator is having very much difficulty trying to figure it out. As it turns out, because they wouldn't turn on Joey, because of that you deserve nothing. She then takes another shot before continuing. However, if Joey finished the design, I might reconsider. So, you can get rich off the design and leave him out? Of course. That's what men are used for, of course. You should know that, as she eyed the captain up and down. The captain then took another shot for herself, then stated, a whole lot more than I'd like to. This time, with a slyness in her eyes, making sure that the former co-worker knew exactly what she was talking about. Then the captain said, but you wanted him too, right? The co-worker did another shot before slurrily saying how she actually didn't want him at all. He was on a fast track to become rich. At that point, she had to push her head off the bar. She was about to fall over. As a female, you understand that, right? Why wouldn't you? The captain simply asked, straightforward. So the entire reputation destruction was just for the plans? That and a little bit of payback for turning me down. No one turns me down. He told us that he was, what did he say? On his grind. With that, the coworker took another shot. Doesn't matter. I'm still going to intercept that report. When I'm done, he'll be looking at the asteroid mines for the next 1,000 years. With that, she turned and smiled wide at the captain. The captain refused to take the next shot in front of her. I see. What happens if your company finds out, though? Well, would they hunt down your mother, too? The co-worker, this time not taking a shot as she was trying to hold herself up. She can protect herself. Bury my part. I mean, we're both going to be rich anyway. And she takes a drink. I just have to make this single problem go away. The captain, now taking her taloned hand away from the shot glass, says, I don't think that would be possible. Why is that? The captain pulled back and then opened a small piece of the clothing, though she didn't have much of it. It was clear to see that she had been bugged. The recording device was right there in the opening. The former co-worker looked at it and stared for a few seconds as though the contemplation of what was going on was slowly getting through her head. As soon as this did, she immediately reached for the recording device, one hand towards that and one hand towards the captain's neck. And then a taloned foot lands on her torso, slamming the coworker back against the bar. Along with that, insectoid limbs grab her legs, slamming them back so they can't move, and then a hoof-sized hand grabs her around the neck. As the former coworker tried to figure out what the hell was happening, the captain simply stated, Didn't you know that humans have a reputation? Several reputations, in fact. One of those happens to be the ability to pact bond with any species. The former coworker at that point realizes how deep she had stepped in it and used the human strength to start fighting back. The former coworker goes with unrelenting fury as everyone tries to keep her from trying to reach for the recording device. The captain keeps trying to pull away, even though many, many cells in her body were telling her to reach out and join the fray. Security would arrive quickly, however not quickly enough to keep from the former coworker from trying to beat the friendly little harpy into the ground. Security tackled her and immediately took her into custody. The captain walked up to one of them and, as politely as possible, held the recording device in one hand, showing it to the security officer, and stated, "I need to speak to your commander immediately." As everyone leaves, off in the distance, you can see a strange, bipedal, almost human-shaped suit in the distance, watching the entire thing, that simply seems to turn and walk away. 9 months later, the captain and crew are moving their belongings into a brand new ship. This brand new ship strikingly resembles the one seen on the data pad 9 months prior. The former crew is practically skipping with anticipation over the new ship. They wanted to put it through its paces, of course, and now they had not only more room, not only more anemones, but now they had all the luxuries they could ever want to do their jobs with. As the cargo area was being finished up by the ground crew, a strange being showed up, one that is not seen very much on the outskirts of space like this. This bipedal was walking next to a repulsor lift cart that was holding up several reinforced containers. When the crew sees this, the biped stops as they run over and started screaming, "It's Joey!" as he raises his visor to say hi to everybody. The entire crew is yelling in excitement to see him there, thankful that he got assigned to this new ship in a sector much closer to the core worlds, so that they would be able to have more time at the space dock, and now they wouldn't be so far from their families for so long. Many of them, to go over and say hi, they ran, they slithered, they flew, and even galloped over to greet him. Many immediately clung on to him, almost pulling him down, even though he was wearing his exosuit. The captain yelled out for everyone to calm down. "You'll get to see him more once we get underway. For right now, you all have duties to attend to." With that, they all seemed to walk away, a little disheartened, but they knew they'd see him later. Joey stays there stoic and looks at the captain with an unwavering stare. "Permission to come aboard, Captain." "Permission granted." Then they both smile. As they head up the ramp, the captain states, "She's a fine ship. I'm sure you'll be happy to get back inside her." As this, she started wagging her tail. Joey himself tried not to grin at the double entendre. "I notice we have a larger crew now." "Is that going to be a problem?" Noticing that the crew was at least 50% larger, he was starting to wonder if he brought up enough nano booster, not that he ever wants to deal with it. And then, as he looked around, he noticed there are now several males on board besides him. With that, he cringed slightly and goes, "I don't know. Hopefully not." The captain, picking up on his apprehension, "Don't worry too much about it right now." As that they continued, Joey pauses as he noticed that his insectoid crewmate is wearing his old coveralls. "Is that my old—" "You left them behind, so consider it salvage. Besides, a few of her species were bothering her, and the outfit seems to keep some of the more aggressive ones of her species away." "Mostly guys, huh?" "Unfortunately, yes, mostly males." Joey simply shrugs as a way of just saying, "Screw it, she can have it." The captain continues, "Oh, before I forget," stopping their walk and standing in front, "there will be another human on board now." As she's looking behind Joey, "Ah, here she comes now." Joey thinks for a moment, "She?" He then turns as a young woman runs up, calling his name, and jumps at him. The young lady hugs him so tight that he can actually feel her through his exosuit as she smiled away up at him. Captain was a bit concerned. "Are you two actually familiar with each other?" Joey puts his hand on the girl and pushes her back slightly, and then motions to her and the captain. Captain, allow me to introduce you to Jezebel, my stepsister. The captain was a little confused at this concept, that is almost exclusively a human thing to have step-siblings, parents, or otherwise. She simply stated that they needed to go and store their gear. As she watched them leave, she was glad to have 2 human engineers on board, and this will actually lighten the load for both of them, as they won't have to focus on the ship itself. Then again, the ship isn't going to need much maintenance. As the dock came up next to the captain, she voiced her concern about needing 2 human engineers on the ship, though it was a larger ship with a larger crew on top of that. The captain, waving her tail slightly, said, "Don't worry. I'm sure they will keep both the ship and the crew very well maintained." She then turned to the dock and said, "After all, humans have a reputation."